Chapter 49. The Truth. King's Landing was buzzing with activity. The wedding between Joffrey Baratheon and Margaery Tyrell was in 4 months, and lords from all over Westeros were arriving in droves, along with merchants and entertainers. It was a pity that Vlad knew that wedding would end badly. In truth, he had plans to go to King's Landing before meeting in Dorne with his wife, once they both set sail for Westeros. He didn't want to kill Joffrey himself, though he knew removing him would stir things up, make the Lannisters unpredictable, and, most importantly, deprive him of 2 things he valued: Tyrion Lannister's mind and his loyalty. Because, if events went as he expected, it would be the dwarf himself who would kill the bastard who claimed to be his father. Vlad planned to be in King's Landing for 2 reasons: to kill the Mountain with his own hands and to make sure Tyrion ended up being sent to Daenerys. With all the changes and his growing influence, he didn't believe Varys would send him directly to her. Most likely, he would send him to young Griff. And that, for Vlad, was unacceptable. Vlad continued writing a few notes before turning to check on Daenerys and her generals. He paused when he heard footsteps approaching. Daenerys entered his chambers wearing a white silk dress that exposed her ribs and back, her braided hair cascading like silver chains. "Aren't you supposed to be resting?" she asked playfully. "I am resting, my love. Planning the fall of my enemies relaxes me," Vlad replied, dramatically imitating the voice of a stereotypical villain. Daenerys laughed like a child. "Poor people of Westeros, mothers, hide your daughters. Then, hide yourselves, for the Impaler is coming," she said with exaggerated drama, raising an arm before collapsing into Vlad's lap. "An exquisite performance," Vlad commented as he kissed her. "If this whole queen thing doesn't work out, we could always become traveling performers." "Why not do it in a few years?" she asked, amused. "We have centuries ahead of us, right?" "True. My essence will be ready in a couple of days and, at last, I'll be able to spend eternity with you," he said, kissing her forehead. "And are you okay?" Daenerys asked with concern. "Weak, but still strong enough to fight 50 men. Poor thing, I'll tell the cooks to make you some soup to regain your strength," she said in the tone of a mother worried about her son. Vlad decided to ignore her with a smile. "What are you doing?" she asked, eyeing the map and the notes. "Planning our triumphant return to Westeros," he replied, amused. "And this?" she asked, pointing to the lines connecting various coats of arms and houses. "These are the houses that have already fallen," he pointed to the Freys and the Boltons. "And these are the ones that must fall if we want to unite Westeros." Daenerys studied the Tully sigil and furrowed her brow. "Tully, aren't they practically finished after the war? If I'm not mistaken, only Brynden Tully remains, right? So, why must they fall?" Vlad explained calmly. "Actually, the fall of House Tully at this point is more symbolic. It was the Targaryens who elevated them during Aegon's conquest. However, Hoster Tully conspired to place his own bloodline on the Iron Throne. That's why he married his daughters to Jon Arryn and Eddard Stark. According to him, they were the best candidates to take the throne after the rebellion. And, actually, he wasn't wrong. Robert Baratheon was a terrible king. If I remember correctly, the crown's debt is 6 million golden dragons, isn't it?" "How?" Daenerys asked, incredulously. "That amount far exceeded what they had used in their conquest. I suspect a certain master of coin diverted funds, but truth be told, Robert spent it all on tournaments, banquets, whores, and wine. He's lucky he died before we could lay our hands on him," Daenerys growled, feeling anger at what had become of her family's throne. Then, her expression changed, and she asked again. "But with House Tully so weakened, is it really necessary to destroy them?" "Actually, it would be a fitting punishment. But to understand it, I need to explain something important." Vlad took a breath before continuing. "The fall of your family wasn't a mere accident, it was the result of a conspiracy that has been brewing for centuries, since the Dance of the Dragons." He pointed to 2 names crossed off his list: the Faith of the Seven and the Citadel. Daenerys furrowed her brow, intrigued. "Explain yourself." When the dragons arrived with Aegon the Conqueror, the Faith realized it had lost its power. Before that, A high septon could make and unmake kings. Maybe not directly, but they knew they were above any king in Westeros. But Aegon and his descendants were above even their gods. To the people, they were divine, riding dragons, wielding magic. The church began losing influence. During Maegor the Cruel's reign, they tried to rebel, but Maegor exterminated most of the fanatics of the faith militant. The survivors learned a lesson: they couldn't fight dragons head-on. So, along with the Citadel, they devised another plan. Daenerys tilted her head. The Maesters. Vlad smiled darkly. The Citadel is more subtle. They don't seek power, at least not in the way lords and kings do. They seek control. What does it matter not to rule as a king, if you can control how rich a kingdom is? How long its people live? In Westeros, knowledge has been trickling down for the last few centuries. The Maesters control what is learned and what isn't. That's why there are no common people who know how to heal wounds, use herbs. For them, knowledge they cannot control should not exist. Like magic. Magic is dangerous, uncontrollable. He leaned toward her, his eyes glowing intensely. If you read the books taught in the Citadel, you'll see that magic was common in ancient times. Dragons, necromancers, sorcerers, things that today seem like fairy tales. But fairy tales were real. Until the Maesters took care of destroying every trace of them. That's ridiculous, Daenerys protested. Magic disappeared for other reasons. Oh, and who taught you that? She opened her mouth to reply, but stopped. Knowledge is as dangerous as a sword, Daenerys. But a sword you can see coming. A lie written in a book becomes the truth for entire generations. Daenerys felt a shiver run down her spine. 34 comments 0 vote. Chapter 50, Conspiracy. So, how did they destroy the Targaryens? Vlad leaned back in his chair. The magic of the Targaryens was in their blood. So, if they couldn't destroy them with armies, they would destroy their blood. For generations, the Maesters were advisors to the Targaryen kings. They had access to their food, their cups, their medicines, delivered their children, helped their pregnant women. A little of some substance that over time eroded the mind. Poison, whispered Daenerys. Exactly. A drop a month doesn't do much. But one drop every month for 40 years can drive even the sanest man mad. Daenerys's face paled. There had always been Targaryens who went mad, who fell ill in strange ways, who had dead or deformed children. Maekar, Aerion, Baelor, Aerys, Vlad said calmly. Daenerys's eyes shone with fury and disbelief. Aerys went mad because of the captivity he suffered in the Dark Valley. Are you sure? Vlad raised an eyebrow. Or maybe there was someone at court making sure he drank and ate the right things. Daenerys felt the room growing smaller. Don't misunderstand me. Your father was indeed a madman in the last years of his life, but before he ruled, he was known as a brilliant and sensible man. He was a personal friend of Tywin Lannister. It was because of that friendship that he named him Hand of the King. It was only when he ascended to the throne that he began to grow paranoid and delusional. It was all manipulated. It was all orchestrated. They made the magic disappear. They ensured that the dragons died. And when the last dragon died, the magic in your blood was extinguished, leaving you more susceptible to poisons. All in a cycle. Vlad took a sheet of paper and began to draw. Let me explain how magic works in this world. Imagine that the world is a closed room. Every magical creature is a small candle releasing smoke. That smoke is magic. If there are many candles, the smoke fills the room, and the magic becomes stronger. The candle doesn't go out easily. Then he drew a bonfire. Dragons are bonfires, much more powerful than candles, he explained. And the Targaryens, by having a blood connection with the dragons, are torches. When there is magic in the world, that magic protects you from the subtle influence of poisons, curses, diseases. Even incest is safe, because the magic stabilizes your lineage. But without dragons, we are like a candle burning out, Daenerys responded. Exactly. I doubt the Citadel knew that ending magic would weaken you like this. But it doesn't matter. They made the magic disappear. They ensured the dragons died. And when the last dragon died, the power of the Targaryens began to crumble, after centuries of madness and decay. Only then was Robert's rebellion possible. Daenerys was stunned, processing the implications of all this. Then came your father's reign. Yes, he was a tormented madman, but still, the people accepted him because he didn't focus on them, he preferred the nobles, he continued. Then he made the foolish mistake of killing the patriarch and the Stark heir, leading the North into rebellion. Then Jon Arryn joined, and soon after, when your brother and Lyanna Stark fled, the Baratheons also joined. Wait, Daenerys interrupted. My brother fled with Lyanna Stark. Didn't he kidnap her? No, not at all. Your brother, as I understand it, had a rare Targaryen trait, dragon dreams. Prophetic dreams that used to warn the Targaryens of danger. Your brother dreamed of the long night, and in his dream, the dragon had 3 heads. So, when Elia Martell had only 2 children before becoming sterile, he knew he needed to remarry. Poor Elia loved him so much that she agreed to divorce him so he could do it legally. What, if something like that had happened, it would have been a scandal. Everyone would have known. Vlad looked at her, amused. She seemed to catch the idea. Maesters, she growled. Maesters, Vlad nodded. They hid the documents. They didn't inform the lords. So, when Rhaegar and Lyanna fled and married legally, no one ever knew. Then came the Tullys. As I said, Hoster desperately wanted his descendants on the throne. So, when the letter from Lyanna reached her brothers informing them that she hadn't been kidnapped, Hoster burned it and sent a letter to Brandon and Rickard Stark telling them that Lyanna was in King's Landing, hoping the Mad King would deny it or imprison them. Fortunately, Aerys unknowingly cooperated and burned them both, ensuring the rebellion. Damn ingrates, you're right, they should burn, all of them, he said, clenching his fists in anger. Then everything that followed is history. The rebellion happened, your brother fell, Robert reigned, and the Targaryen dynasty collapsed. What they didn't count on was that Ed Stark and Jon Arryn wouldn't accept the throne, leaving Robert as king. And what Robert didn't expect was Ed Stark's betrayal. Betrayal? Asked Daenerys. Rhaegar and Lyanna had a son, born in the Tower of Joy when Ed arrived to rescue his sister. Do I have a nephew? Daenerys jumped up, excited. Vlad calmed her with a gesture. Yes, Aegon Targaryen by birth, Jon Snow by upbringing. Ed Stark raised him as his bastard and sent him to serve the Night's Watch when he turned 14. How dare he? Live as a bastard? Daenerys exploded. Why haven't we gone for him? Honestly, because that boy is 100% Stark. He has black hair and that naive predisposition to be honorable even if it costs him his life. But the truth is that he's doing an important job at the Wall. As I understand it, he's reorganizing the Night's Watch and keeping the Wildlings at bay, until we go to negotiate. Do you plan for them to cross? Asked Daenerys, calmer now. No, my plan is to make them kneel, or burn them all. I'm not giving the Night King 100,000 soldiers, Vlad said seriously. This is important. That's why, as long as Jon can be of help without knowing it, I'll keep him where he is. Also, as I told you, that boy is almost a Stark. If you offered him the Targaryen name, he would never use it. You'll see. Daenerys frowned. I understand. Just take care of him. Not every day does someone of your blood come along who isn't mad. Vlad hugged her tightly. Don't worry, my love. After getting you back on that horrible throne again, we'll make sure our family is strong. No one will be able to hurt them. Whoever tries, will get what's coming to them. Fire and blood, Daenerys declared, more determined and confident every day. Fire and blood, Vlad nodded. 29 comments 0 vote. Chapter 51, Blood of My Blood. Several days after their conversation about Westeros, Vlad had finally finished gathering his blood essence. It was this essence that would transform Daenerys, like him, into a progenitor, his equal, his eternal bride. In practice, there were different ways to create vampires. The majority involved giving the blood of the sire, or creator to a human, either replacing all of their blood or just a part of it. Generally, the only difference this caused was shortening the transformation and awakening process. But Vlad, being a progenitor, could accelerate it naturally, so he usually used the first method. It was less cumbersome. However, if he wanted Daenerys to be his equal, those methods were out of the question. Fortunately, he had total control over his abilities and an encyclopedic knowledge of his own nature, so he knew how to achieve it. No vampire in history had ever attempted such a thing. Being a progenitor meant occupying the pinnacle of the vampire hierarchy, and giving up that privilege was unthinkable. What immortal being would sacrifice their absolute dominion? Vlad, however, was no ordinary vampire. In this world, where his lineage was the only one that existed, there was no reason to fear another of his kind. Daenerys would be his wife, not a rival. Furthermore, it would take centuries before she mastered her abilities with the skill he possessed. After all, Vlad had been designed to be the epitome of his species. A subterranean room in the Great Pyramid of Meereen had been prepared for the ceremony. To be honest, it didn't need such fanfare. It wasn't a ritual. Vlad could have simply given her his essence and laid her in a bed to wait. But for both Daenerys and Vlad, this was something solemn. For her, it was like a second wedding, but unlike the first, it was a union for love, a bond that would bind her to Vlad in life for all eternity. For Vlad, it was something similar, though more in tune with his vampiric nature. Marriages didn't mean much to a being who could live forever, but this, giving your blood essence, a crystallization of your heart and power, to the woman you've chosen to spend eternity with. That was a real, tangible commitment. And he would do it gladly. The exterior of the room was guarded by his 5 blood riders, and the entire wall of Meereen was on high alert, reinforced by the best-trained freedmen and trusted soldiers of the Second Sons. Jorah Mormont and Esser Barristan were in the palace gardens with Missandei, waiting. Vlad had informed them that he would be performing an important ritual with Daenerys, which might last 2 days or more. He explained that there was nothing to fear, but warned that if anything dared to interrupt it, he would reduce all of Meereen to ashes. No one believed his words were an exaggeration. Those under his command had come to know him, and they knew that Vlad never lied. If he made a promise, he kept it. That's why the Dothraki, the freedmen armies, the Second Sons, and the Unsullied were all on high alert. The 4 dragons circled above the pyramid at regular intervals, and the sentinels kept torches lit as an emergency signal. A total curfew had been declared. No one left after dark. Any suspicious person was arrested and executed without trial. No one knew exactly what was going on, but there were rumors among the people that someone had tried to attack the queen. That simple rumor was enough to make any pickpocket, thief, assassin, and opponent hide like rats or flee the city. For this reason, all armed groups under his command were active. The Dothraki patrolled the alleys and outer areas of the city in small mounted groups, the freedmen maintained order in the markets and civilian districts, the Unsullied sealed the palace entrances, and the Second Sons controlled the main gates, ready to shut or evacuate as needed. Even some trusted spies infiltrated the population to prevent disturbances or identify saboteurs. No one in Essos wanted to awaken the wrath of the Impaler. Not after what happened with Krasny's Monaclaws, whose body still hung in Meereen's square, impaled on a cross forged by Vlad and kept conscious through blood magic, suffering endless torment. While the city remained in an uproar, the subterranean room was warm and calm, even silent. Daenerys Stormborn, of House Targaryen, observed the room's decoration. Banners of her house and Vlad's hung on the walls, excellently lit by oil lamps and candles, making the space feel welcoming rather than ominous. In the center of the room, there was only a red velvet chaise longue where Daenerys could recline, and a table with a chalice made of carved quartz crystals. "Are you ready, my love?" asked Vlad, gently caressing her face. "Will it hurt?" asked Daenerys, uncertainty in her voice. Vlad had explained to her that to be reborn, she must first die. "It will be like falling asleep," he replied, caressing her tenderly. "And then I'll wake up again," she said, more as if trying to convince herself than as an affirmation. "I'm sure of it, but if not, I will go to the gates of death and tear you from its claws." Nothing in this world will separate you from me, I swear, Vlad said solemnly, his eyes fixed on hers. Daenerys closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. I trust you. Vlad smiled, a tender gesture reserved only for her. Then, with precision and calm, he sank the claws of one finger into his own chest, right above his heart. A drop of scarlet blood emerged and floated toward the chalice. And then, the drop expanded. As if it contained an ocean, the blood grew, filling the cup to the brim, undulating and alive. Vlad held the vessel delicately and offered it to her. Everything I have been and everything I am is here, he pointed, looking at the blood in the cup. And now, like my heart, it belongs to you. Daenerys didn't know what to say. She simply looked at him with all the love she felt for him and drank in one gulp. To her surprise, the blood didn't taste bitter or unpleasant, it was like water, fluid and clean. She placed the cup on the table and, without thinking, kissed Vlad. A soft kiss, so full of love that it was almost tender. He took her hand, helping her recline on the chaise lounge, staying kneeling beside her, gently stroking her head. Daenerys felt an overwhelming need to sleep, and before closing her eyes, she whispered softly. Forever. She didn't need to say more. Vlad responded to the whisper, though there was no need for him to say the, I love you, they both knew was there. Forever, he replied, watching her fall asleep. 27 comments 0 vote. Chapter 52, Awakening. Vlad had remained completely still for 2 days, staring at Daenerys, feeling how her insides were changing, how her heart gradually quickened as the blood transformed everything within her. He was happy, after all, who wouldn't be? He was going to be able to spend eternity with her. But when the process reached its final phase, when her heart began to beat slower and slower, until it stopped completely, Vlad felt something he thought he had forgotten. Fear. A primitive, icy terror coursed through his veins like an electric current. Panic that made his skin crawl and clouded his reasoning. He wanted to scream, curse, shake her awake, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew she would return. He had that certainty, and yet, the 48 hours he waited by her side, completely still, felt like a very twisted personal hell. He tried to calm himself, but his mind spun in circles, trapped in fictional scenarios, absurd explanations, desperate theories. All with the same axis, the possibility that Daenerys would not awaken. And then, after exactly 2 days since she drank his blood, her body began to react. First, her skin became paler, flawless, as if light itself caressed it. Her hair, already beautiful, became even silkier, like strands of silver. Her arms, slightly thin from years of deprivation in her childhood, gained firmness and harmony, her hips subtly widened, her abdomen became firm and strong, and her breasts took on a fuller, more alive shape. Daenerys had already been a beautiful woman, but life on the streets, the constant struggle, had left invisible marks. Now, the embrace had erased each of them, revealing what had always been there, latent, the perfect shape of feminine beauty. If her beauty was known in the world before, now it would be enough to start wars. With each transformation, Vlad calmed down little by little, but he did not move. He refused to do so, as if looking away for even a second could make her disappear. And then, after what felt like an eternity, Daenerys's eyelids moved. As if the world had held its breath and finally let it go, she opened her eyes. The world was new. She didn't recognize it at first. Everything was too sharp, too vibrant. The texture of the air, every particle traveling with the currents, the way the light caressed the surfaces, the distant heartbeats of human hearts in the gardens, the whisper of the wind between the banners. Everything came to her at once, in waves that didn't overwhelm her, but intertwined like a perfect symphony. She could separate them, disconnect them, weave them together, as much as she wanted. Her eyes, though still a deep violet, now shone with an unusual clarity, as if sculpted from liquid amethyst, vibrating like gems. There was a nearly magical glow in them, a hypnotic shine. More beautiful, more alive. She blinked, and the flames of the candles danced in slow motion for her. She tilted her head slightly, and she could count the individual threads of the velvet chaise, distinguish the subtlest perfume of rose oil in the air, every crack in the stone walls. And then she saw him. "Vlad," she whispered, but her voice had changed. It was clearer, deeper, like a soft, beautiful melody. Vlad, kneeling at her side, motionless, with a devotion of stone. His eyes were pools of golden fire, and for the first time, she didn't see him as a man, but as what he truly was. She had been blind until that moment. Vlad had always seemed handsome, perfect to her, but even so, she hadn't been able to see the magnitude of what he was. Her poor human sight couldn't capture the perfection that made him up, how each muscle of his imposing chest tensed as he breathed, how his eyes glowed with a beautiful golden light like the dawn, how his lips were now more tempting than ever. She had been blind, but now she saw. So, she moved to kiss him. But unknowingly, she moved faster than she ever had before, faster than her human body had ever allowed. The chaise flew across the room and crashed hard into the wall, breaking into splinters. Daenerys collided with Vlad's body, and for the first time since she met him, he staggered backward. She was shocked. She had seen Vlad resist assaults from men, horses, and even dragons, without moving an inch. But now, she had made him retreat. "Be careful, my love," he said, laughing. "Now it's your turn to measure your strength." "What? How?" Daenerys was stunned. "Gods, I feel amazing. I've never felt so strong, so alive." "You're euphoric. You just need to calm down a bit and control your impulses. You'll regain your human sensitivity when your mind adapts to the new sensations." "My gods, I feel like I could lift a ship with my hands." She laughed with enthusiasm. "And you could. Now you have the strength for that and more. But first, you need to drink." With those words, Daenerys felt for the first time a burning sensation in her throat. A thirst like never before in her life, not even when she wandered through the desert. "Now, my love, drink," Vlad said as he exposed his shoulder blade, offering himself. "What? No, you already gave me your blood before, you're weak," she shook her head, alarmed. "Weak, me?" Vlad laughed. "This is part of the process, my love. Now you will drink my blood, and I will drink yours. And then we will be one blood. United for all eternity." Daenerys hesitated for a moment, but she could see it clearly. Vlad showed no signs of weakness or fatigue. On the contrary, his bearing was as imposing as always, perhaps more so. And the thirst burned in her throat like a primal fire, impossible to ignore. 34 comments 0 vote. Chapter 53. Liquid Ecstasy. She had tasted the finest wines of Essos, the thick beer of the north, the meat from the Dornish markets. She had known ecstasy in her husband's arms, had melted into pleasure for entire nights, believing herself in heaven, dying to reach the next climax. But how wrong she had been. The taste of Vlad's blood on her tongue was like the very essence of the wildest, most unrestrained night of passion distilled into a dark, exquisite wine, served only for her. She felt the intoxicating essence of her husband fill her lips, and thought she might faint from pure pleasure. And when she heard Vlad let out a deep, hungry growl as he pulled her small body toward him, gripping her hips with desire, she felt her consciousness teeter at the edge of the abyss. They writhed together for a few seconds, caught in a whirlwind of pleasure, until Daenerys, with great effort, pulled back just slightly, locking eyes with him as he stared back, both of their faces flushed and filled with lust. Then, knowing what was to come, she tore off the white dress she wore in a single motion, revealing her slender figure and offering her bare shoulder blade to her husband. For the first time, Vlad did not take her with tenderness. He sank his fangs into her skin with unrestrained hunger. And Daenerys, far from feeling pain, felt her legs give way beneath the most explosive, earth-shattering orgasm she had ever experienced. A loud, deep, sensual moan escaped her lips, spurring Vlad on even more, who lifted her as if she weighed nothing and slammed her against the wall with such force that the stone trembled and cracked from the impact. She felt her husband invade her, even as her blood filled her own lips. What came after turned into a haze of untamed desire, two naked bodies intertwined in a wild, almost feral dance that resembled a fight between predators more than an act of love. Daenerys moaned with such intensity it would have made even the most seasoned Lyseni courtesan blush, and Vlad growled like a rabid wolf, unleashed, as they alternated between the pleasures of the flesh and the ecstasy of blood, in the longest, most feral and visceral session of passion they had ever shared. Outside the underground chamber, Meereen remained on alert. No one knew why, but the city had stayed eerily calm despite the presence of soldiers. In the outer gardens, Jorah, Barristan, and Missandei spoke, visibly concerned about the supposed ritual Vlad was performing. Missandei had spent the past few days trying to soothe the two men. As one of the closest people to the couple, she knew Vlad would never do anything to endanger Daenerys, but even she was beginning to worry. Suddenly, she felt a tremor in the ground, as if someone had struck the castle walls. A second later, another. Then another. The blows were strong and rhythmic. The treetops in the garden swayed, and the water in the fountain rippled. Everyone stood at once, alert. "An attack?" asked Sir Barristan. "No, it's not coming from outside the walls," Jorah replied, straining his ears. Then his eyes went wide, and he bolted toward the castle, shouting. "It's coming from inside," he cried, "from the underground chamber." The other two followed him, along with several guards on duty. Jorah, Barristan, and the soldiers ran through the corridors, filled with uncertainty, expecting to find an attack or a battle, but instead found nothing. The only thing happening was that the blows became clearer the closer they got to the chamber. When they reached the doors, the Bloodriders blocked their path. "Jorah Mormont," said Caron, leader of the Bloodriders, speaking with the polished courtesy gained from long service under Vlad. "The king was clear. He is not to be disturbed. Do you plan to disobey?" "Are you insane?" Sir Barristan exclaimed beside him. "His Majesty is under attack." The Bloodriders all burst out laughing. "Believe me, Sir, that is not an attack," said Nork with a cheeky grin. "Then what in the seven hells is?" Barristan was cut off by the sudden increase in the rhythm of the pounding, which caused dust to fall from the ceiling, followed by a sensual, muffled moan, barely audible through the walls and distance. Everyone froze. Jorah turned red as a green boy, Barristan coughed awkwardly, and Missandei covered her mouth with both hands, blushing all the way to her ears. "There's nothing to protect here, sirs," said Laren, another Bloodrider, laughing. "Best return to your posts." The soldiers looked at one another, some stifling chuckles. Jorah turned on his heels, flustered. "Back to your posts," he ordered, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "And give their majesties some privacy." 2 more days passed before the mysterious tremors finally ceased within the Great Pyramid of Meereen. They were 2 days in which men and women in the castle found it hard to sleep, yet spent the time chuckling and sharing lewd comments as the rumors spread. Some even began to speculate that a small heir would emerge in the coming months. Missandei was no stranger to carnal pleasure, but she was stunned by the vigor not only of her king, but of her queen as well, who seemed capable of matching his pace. She was briefly concerned when Daenerys' handmaidens, Alyssa and Mera, were called to the underground chamber, but when they emerged minutes later, fully dressed, just a little dizzy and flushed, it became clear that her lord was just as devoted as he appeared. 2 days passed, and at last, the doors opened. Missandei waited with fresh clothes and blankets, but when she stepped inside, she found the chamber had been turned into a battlefield. The walls bore deep cracks, the floor was marked as if it had withstood a clash between titans, and the remains of the furniture lay scattered everywhere. This chapter is a bit more verbose. It has more flowery descriptions, and I generally use more adjectives than I'm used to. And no, it's not because of the AI, it just seemed like the only way to include a moderately explicit sex scene in the narrative without it seeming vulgar or clashing with the tone of the story so far. What do you think? The Jagger creators' thoughts. 31 comments, 0 vote. Chapter 54. New Life. But what surprised her the most was seeing Daenerys. She had always been a beautiful woman, but now she looked like a goddess, almost ethereal. She moved with the coordination and grace of a dancer, and her voice now carried a musical quality, as if every word were part of a melody. And her eyes, still violet, now glowed with an almost hypnotic inner light, making it impossible for Missandei to look away. Her body was flawless, not a single scratch in sight, and she wore a satisfied smile as she wrapped herself in the Targaryen banner. "Gods, thank you, Missandei. We forgot to bring a change of clothes," she said with a smile so radiant that Missandei felt her heart skip a beat. "You look different, my lady," was all Missandei could say, averting her eyes as the queen dressed. "Different how?" Daenerys asked with genuine curiosity, and even her question sounded like music flowing. Vlad's deep voice emerged from beneath another banner bearing his own sigil. "She's stunned by your breathtaking beauty, my queen," he said in a playful tone, pulling on a pair of pants while leaving his chest bare. "You make the rest of the world look dull by comparison." Daenerys laughed with the carefree joy of a child, rolling her eyes. "Don't listen to my husband, Missandei. Flattery is a cheap substitute for truth," she teased with a regal air. Vlad laughed heartily. "Damn it, you know all my tricks," he said as he leaned in and gave her a passionate kiss. Missandei could only blush. The passion between the couple, who now looked like gods of beauty, left her dazed. "How long were we gone in total, Missandei?" Vlad asked, turning to her. 4 days in total, my king." Vlad clicked his tongue in mild annoyance. "I suppose we should emerge, my love, or the realm might collapse without us." Daenerys kept laughing as she wrapped her arms around his chest, the gesture comical due to their difference in height. "Heavy lies the head that wears the crown," she quipped, repeating her own joke. Vlad rolled his eyes and said, "Time to prepare for war." Daenerys smiled beautifully. "We'll make them pay," she said darkly, but to Vlad, it only made her look even sexier. Thus, the days passed pleasantly for Vlad. Truth be told, the bonding ritual had weakened him, but only in terms of his status as a progenitor vampire. For any human or regular vampire, he was still the strongest being alive, and he needed only a couple of weeks to recover. The best part was that he could use that time to prepare his fleet and men for war. Throughout his stay in Meereen, he had trained his troops in modern battle tactics, formations, trench building, guerrilla warfare. Notably, his army was well supplied thanks to the generosity of the cities in Slaver's Bay. Every soldier had armor, a shield, a sword, and a spear. Vlad had personally ordered Valyrian steel armor to be forged for both himself and Daenerys. Thanks to the death of the warlocks of the House of the Undying in Qarth, he had obtained the secrets to create this mythical metal, and now was a perfect time to put them into practice. The process wasn't difficult. The hardest part was obtaining real steel using the forges of the era before heat treating it with dragon fire. After melting it, it was tempered in a mixture treated with blood magic. The armor had been under construction since they arrived in Meereen and would only be finished right before Vlad's departure, which, in truth, was rather fast, considering they needed his constant help in forging it. Vlad had also commissioned a Valyrian steel sword for Daenerys. Since her transformation, her new nature allowed her to march into battle without fear, and he wasn't about to deprive her of such a pleasure. As for Daenerys's new nature, the situation was complicated. As a newly turned vampire, she was still overwhelmed by her new impulses, but, interestingly, she hadn't killed anyone yet. Vlad attributed it to her inherently kind and compassionate nature. What she did struggle to control, however, was her desire to be with him. Now that she no longer tired, Vlad had to constantly remind her they had to leave the bedroom. If he didn't, they might spend weeks doing nothing but hours and hours of sex. Vlad eventually got her to channel all that energy into her new hobby, training with the sword. Ser Barristan and Jorah had initially objected, but after seeing the effects of the ritual, they set aside most of their concerns. Daenerys now moved with the grace and coordination of a trained dancer. She was fast and strong. Vlad asked her to keep her feats within human limits, or it would create problems. He wanted to delay the annoyance of people seeing them as gods, at least for a few centuries, so keeping their strength at human levels would help. But even while staying within human scale, her new coordination, reflexes, and agility made her quite a competent warrior. If she had been taller than 5 feet 7 inches, she might have been even more intimidating. Sir Barristan praised her constantly for her quick learning and talent. Vlad invented a lie about having awakened the magic in her Targaryen blood, which let him avoid explaining things in detail. The ever-reliable, a sorcerer did it, never failed. Preparing their departure from Meereen wasn't without setbacks. The sons of the Harpy, those pesky liberators, came out of their holes to cause trouble, killing several unsullied patrols before they could be tracked down. Vlad wanted to leave the matter to Daenerys. It was a good way for her to let loose for a while and kill for the first time. So, he put her in command of his Bloodriders, and in less than 5 days, the sons of the Harpy and all their sympathizers were tied to stakes, impaled in Meereen's main square. As much as Vlad would have liked to witness an impalement himself, this was Daenerys's moment. 23 comments 0 vote. Chapter 55. Mother of the Dragon. Daenerys was known as Mizza, the merciful mother, the liberator of the slaves of Meereen. She had torn off their chains, given them bread and dignified work, and rescued them from the cruelty of their masters. An invaluable reputation for a ruler, but in moments like this, it was also a burden. And that day, she was determined to cast it off. She rose in the center of the scaffold, standing tall on the raised platform in the square, clad in dark Valyrian steel armor. The scales of the metal interlocked like those of a dragon, and behind her, a blood-red cloak billowed, bearing the emblem of her house. Behind her, Vlad, wearing matching armor, sat on one of the 2 stone thrones. Barristan, Missandei, and the guards, led by Grey Worm, flanked the structure alongside the Bloodriders, now dressed in their barbaric armor. Daenerys looked out over the crowd packed into the square, surrounding the captured masters, barely contained by the line of Unsullied. Then, she raised her voice so that all could hear. "People of Meereen," she cried out, her voice firm and beautiful, rising above the clamor, "I stand before you, people of free men, as your queen and protector. You all know that my husband and I are foreigners, that we were not born or raised among you. And yet, when we saw your suffering, we knew we could not stand idly by." She let her words settle. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, followed by shouts of praise. "And yet, there were those who opposed us. Those who saw all the good we did by freeing men, women, and children, and felt nothing but rage. Not for justice, not for love of their city, but because they lost their gold coins and their power." She turned to the chained masters and pointed a finger at them. The square erupted in boos. The faces of former slaves reflected a mixture of fury and hope. "Despite all my mercy, all the concessions I offered them," she continued, her tone bitter and her expression grim, "despite allowing them to keep their power and their wealth, they could not accept it. Even when they saw that hiring free men could be cheaper than enslaving them, still, they could not do it. Do you know why?" No one answered. Daenerys paused, letting the silence speak for her. "Because these men do not love wealth, nor do they value comfort. What they cherish, what they long for, is cruelty. They take pleasure in seeing good men and women chained like animals, beaten, starved, broken. They do not want you for your worth. They want you because your pain makes them feel powerful." The crowd burst into shouts, furious and impassioned. Many raised their fists. Some cried. Others simply stared at Daenerys, as if someone had finally put into words what they had suffered in silence for years. She raised a hand, asking for silence. Her face was solemn, her gaze burned like dragonfire. "That is what we fight against. Not just chains and shackles, not just walls and whips, we fight a poison that lives in the hearts of cruel and greedy men. Today, we tear it out by the root. These men, known as the Sons of the Harpy, conspired to overthrow you from the throne of Meereen, because in their eyes, they had the right to trample your bodies for their pleasure, to chain and kill you without remorse, simply for their own satisfaction." She took a few steps toward the masters, her eyes fixed on them like blades. "And that is why, today, the people will witness the fate of all who seek to place chains upon men. You, those who suffered, who wept, who buried children, fathers, and mothers, you have the final word. There will be no more masters in Meereen." She turned again to the crowd, her voice rising like a flame. The crowd responded with a single cry, a human roar that made the city walls tremble. "Mizza! The dragons roared from atop the Great Pyramid, as if celebrating with their mother, growing closer as they heard her call. For several months, the four beasts had done little more than eat and rest, growing relentlessly. Now, they were as large as elephants, strong enough to carry their riders with ease. They descended from the sky with a deafening roar that chilled the blood of every noble of Meereen present in the square, condemned or not. Kinvara, leader of the Red Faith, who had practically moved her seat to Meereen, raised her hands to the heavens, praying and praising what she considered the living embodiment of the fire of Azor. The dragons landed with a crash that shook the very stones of the city and spread their majestic wings as if to show the world their glory. But what happened next left all present breathless, except the king and queen. Dracul, the largest of the dragons, bowed his horn-crowned head toward Vlad. And spoke. From his steaming jaws came a guttural sound, rough as lava flowing over stone, but unmistakable in meaning in High Valyrian. Kepa, Kepa, father. A hush fell over the square. The crowd's eyes widened in disbelief. But it was no mistake, no illusion, because, moments later, Dracul turned his burning gaze toward Daenerys and, with the same effort, uttered another word. Munya, Munya, mother. The crowd erupted in cries of praise. Kinvara and the faithful of the Red Faith fell to their knees in tears, while Meereen's nobles turned pale, some swaying as if about to faint. The dragons, creatures more powerful than any other on the planet, symbols of power and the gods themselves, now bowed before their kings. Daenerys watched the crowd's reaction in silence, her eyes gleaming with determination as the dragons, still encircling her, roared fiercely. Then she raised her hand, and at once, silence fell over the plaza. 27 comments 0 vote. Chapter 56, Execution. Daenerys watched the crowd's reaction in silence, her eyes gleaming with determination as the dragons, still circling her, roared with force. Then, she raised her hand, and silence immediately fell over the square. Those who conspired in the sewers, she said firmly, her voice rising above the murmurs, those who joined the sons of the Harpy to steal the freedom of the people, deserve neither mercy nor compassion. They, who chose cruelty, who used fear and oppression as tools of power, will die today. With every word, the tension grew. The captured nobles trembled with fear. Today, she continued, her gaze cold as it swept over the nobles, a chilling contrast to the beauty of her face, I shall take your lives, as I have done with so many others before you. Some of the nobles, already on their knees, tried to plead, but Daenerys turned her back on them. Their fate had already been decided. They understood the significance of what was about to happen. My children, she murmured with a maternal softness as she stroked the scaled necks of Rhaegal and Dracul. Dracarys. A deafening roar burst from the dragons. Dracul, the largest of them all, was the first to spread his wings and unleash a cry, his shadow casting darkness over the plaza. At his side, the other three dragons followed, roaring and opening their jaws. The air quickly grew hot, and a burning breeze began to swirl around those present. Vlad, standing beside her, watched the scene with a calm yet dangerous gaze. Fire was the fitting punishment, not just for these nobles, but for all who still believed they could defy the future he and Daenerys had worked so hard to build. And then, the dragons unleashed their fire. Pure, intense, voracious flames engulfed the nobles in a blinding explosion of heat and light. Screams were drowned out by the roar of fire, which consumed their bodies and turned their souls into smoke. The spectators, both terrified and mesmerized, could not look away. The spectacle was overwhelming. When the fire finally faded, only ashes remained. The cruelties these men had wrought no longer had shape. Only a lesson that would be etched in the memory of all who witnessed it. Daenerys slowly turned to the crowd, her face serene, but her eyes shone with intensity. This is the fate of those who choose to place chains upon others, she declared with a voice that echoed like a call for justice. Those who seek oppression will find only fire and blood. The response was immediate. The Unsullied struck the ground with their spears, the Dothraki let out war cries, the freedmen cheered, and the dragons roared into the sky. Vlad, from his position beside the thrones, observed the woman who had emerged from the vulnerable girl he had rescued from her brother's clutches. and for the first time in a long while, he smiled with genuine pride. In the days that followed the execution, Vlad immersed himself in preparations for his departure. Westeros was not his immediate destination, but rather the solution to a more pressing problem: ships. The true obstacle to war wasn't numbers. His armies already boasted more than 150,000 men. The problem was transporting them. In theory, he had a fleet larger than those of Lannisport or the Iron Islands, a force to be reckoned with at sea. But in practice, his ships, generously acquired in Slavers Bay and Karth, were insufficient. He had 150 warships, designed to carry 100 soldiers each, but they could barely transport 80 with all the necessary supplies. His other 15 merchant ships, capable of holding 200 people, were also not enough. Even stretched to the limit, he could only move 15,000 men in a single trip, which was nearly laughable if he planned to conquer Westeros. So, he would travel to Braavos, to negotiate, to buy, or to take whatever was necessary. 200 additional merchant vessels would suffice. Meanwhile, Daenerys would go with a small diplomatic retinue to Dorne, to discover whether House Martell would support the last Targaryen in her claim for the Iron Throne. If the negotiations went as he hoped, the fleet of Dorne combined with that of Braavos would be enough to transport more than 60,000 men in 1 or 2 voyages. But before setting out, he needed to thoroughly inspect his entire army. First came the fleet. He gathered his best captains and personally oversaw the inspection of each of the 100 warships and 15 merchant vessels. Any loose plank, torn sail, or weakened anchor was replaced without delay. The shipyards worked day and night, hammers and saws ringing like war drums. The dragons flew over the harbor every sunset, practicing formation flight with their mother, determined to ensure they could not be struck by any arrow, as if the Valyrian steel protections Vlad had forged were not enough. Vlad walked among the docks, inspecting stores of grain, water, wine, and oil, ensuring each container was sealed and each load properly secured. There would be no hunger or disease among his ranks. Then came the organization of the army. The Dothraki riders were divided into smaller legions, each led by one of his blood riders, ready to move swiftly once they reached land. The horses and men, now armored, had turned the Dothraki into the most fearsome and effective cavalry ever seen. The Unsullied, disciplined as always, were arranged into companies designed to assault cities, streets, and narrow passages, using overlapping shield formations adapted for slow but highly effective movement. Their armor was also changed and improved. Shields forged from the finest steel and leather breastplates crafted for durability and lightness. Vlad appointed commanders who spoke the common tongue, men loyal to him, many of them raised by his own hand since the fall of Astaper. The freedmen and mercenaries were organized into mixed squads, reinforced by spearmen from Astaper and crossbowmen from Yunkai. Remember, I have a Patreon where you can read up to chapter 84. Patreon.com. The Jagger. The Jagger creators' thoughts. 25 comments, 0 vote. Chapter 57. War preparations. Each ship would carry a balanced mix of units, designated commanders, and a scribe responsible for keeping records of the equipment, provisions, and number of men on board, along with a full squad of medical teams, the best this era had to offer, brought directly from Volantis. But all this machinery would only make sense if the plan was clear. And Vlad had already designed it with meticulous precision. One day, amidst all his planning, he gathered all his generals, trusted men, the progeny he had left in charge of the city, and his most loyal captains. They were not few, but Vlad had ensured their absolute obedience through his compulsion. While not a subtle ability, it was more than enough to detect if there were spies among his inner circle. Daenerys stood by his side, gently caressing his forearm as his men entered his office. The office was filled with bookshelves, holding various types of books. In the center, a solid wooden table took up most of the space, and in front of the window sat a wooden desk where many documents lay, along with candles and inkwells. The central table was large enough for everyone to gather around without issue, and in the middle, a basic map of Westeros was spread out, with several reports distributed among his generals. Ser Barristan and Missandei stood beside Daenerys, As always, while Jorah Mormont entered alongside Grey Worm. Despite having confessed his betrayal ahead of time, Daenerys had not fully forgiven him, so she kept him out of her inner circle. "Gentlemen," greeted Vlad. Daenerys cleared her throat with amused reproach. "And lovely ladies," Vlad corrected himself with a smile. "It is time to plan our return to Westeros," he announced solemnly. Everyone nodded. The few men from Westeros smiled, eager to finally return to their homeland. The generals also showed satisfaction, albeit for different reasons. They saw in this war an opportunity to gain glory and titles. Even the 5 progeny Vlad had created to control Meereen wore calculating smiles, anticipating how their power would grow once he departed. Daenerys, more beautiful than ever under her new vampiric nature, had a radiant and predatory smile that only emphasized her ethereal beauty. "I will depart for Braavos in 5 days. I'll negotiate with the Sea Lord to secure at least 150 ships. That will be enough to transport our troops to Westeros and establish a stable base of operations. Then, Daenerys will travel to Dorne in secret and meet with Doran Martell. If his family remains loyal to the Targaryen cause, we'll strike a deal that will grant us additional ships to complement those from Braavos, allowing us to transport even more men. I intend to land in Westeros with 50,000 soldiers," he declared, casting a meaningful glance at Daenerys. The mission in Dorne was, in theory, relatively simple. He had given Daenerys free rein to negotiate as she saw fit, trusting in her charisma and lineage. The only non-negotiable part was to secure, and take as a guest, Myrcella Baratheon. He moved a few wooden figures to a specific spot on the map. Ser Barristan and Jorah were visibly surprised by the location. "Lannisport, my lord?" Jorah asked, unable to hide his curiosity. "Are we not planning to reclaim King's Landing?" Daenerys shot him a glare that could have fit him into an envelope. "Are you questioning your king?" she asked, venom in her voice. "I wouldn't dare, my queen, but it's crucial that the generals are aware of the overall strategy," Jorah replied in a conciliatory tone. "And you're right," Vlad interjected. He looked into Daenerys's eyes, silently asking her to control her temper. Her transition had made her noticeably more fiery. "To answer your question, Ser Jorah, while taking King's Landing would be a moral blow to the enemy, it would be a strategic mistake. We would be isolated, with the Stormlands, the Vale, and Highgarden closing in on our flanks. Additionally, our fleet would be rendered useless once the enemy fortified the sea routes, and key ports like Lannisport and Aldtown will be well defended." He paused and pointed to Lannisport on the map. Lannisport, on the other hand, is vulnerable, with Tywin's forces focused on the capital. If we strike quickly, we can advance toward Castle Rock, perhaps the only fortress capable of withstanding dragons. By taking it, we'll cut off the enemy's supply and retreat lines, destroying their reputation in the process. Then, the Black Fleet, the name for the war fleet, my wife, and I will sail to Pike. Ser Barristan frowned and asked, "Do you plan to recruit the Ironborn, my lord? They are rapists and murderers," he spat bitterly. "I plan to reduce the island of Pike to ashes," Vlad replied coldly. There were 2 things he despised above all else: child killers and rapists. The Ironborn were both. I will not allow them to strike from the rear. According to my spies, they have 70 warships ready to raid. I will reduce that number to 0 and burn their island and their people to the ground." No one objected, although some thought the punishment excessive. Vlad merely gave them a look before continuing. "With 30,000 men, we will march on Highgarden. We'll take control of the kingdom's granary and cut off the enemy's food supply." "My lord," Ser Barristan spoke cautiously, "the Tyrells are allied with the Lannisters. Mace Tyrell plans to wed his daughter to Joffrey, and Highgarden can muster at least 50,000 men." "You are correct, Ser Barristan, but I have reasons to believe the marriage between Margaery and Joffrey will not take place. And if I can assure Olenna Tyrell the safety and escape of her granddaughter in King's Landing, the Tyrells will join our cause," he noted, with a smile that vanished a second later. "And if not, 30,000 men, plus 4 dragons, will make the Tyrells reconsider their loyalties." Everyone in the room, save for Daenerys, felt a chill run down their spine. 23 comments 0 vote. Chapter 58. The Plan. Vlad continued explaining as his fingers slid southward, toward the citadel in Aldtown. After securing Highgarden, we'll land 15,000 men in Aldtown. While Daenerys and I fly with the dragons, we will destroy the seat of the faith after exposing their conspiracy against the Targaryens. In doing so, we'll take control of the citadel, securing the center of knowledge on this continent. He then moved another ivory piece. Once our base is established, 40,000 more men will set sail from Meereen with golden dragons, supplies, and artillery. The Dothraki cavalry will control the roads, the Black Fleet, the seas. Then, Daenerys and I will personally visit the western houses to ensure their loyalty. Will those houses swear fealty to your grace? Asked Missandei. Or they will burn, Vlad concluded, curtly. The Westerlands were only valuable for their mines. He could eliminate all noble families and place loyal ones in their castles. This must be done within a year and a half from the next moon, gentlemen, Vlad declared. The council members looked at one another, surprised. My lord, that is very little time, observed Dario Naharis. I know, but everyone here knows the truth behind this war. Believe it or not, you all understand that we must unify Westeros quickly, while conserving our strength. His inner circle had already been told the true threat. Beyond the wall, the White Walkers and their whites were advancing, recruiting warriors that felt no pain nor fatigue. It should be said that skepticism varied among them, but those who had served Vlad long enough had witnessed his magic and his power. They understood that, if the threat was as deadly as he claimed, Westeros had to unite, or it would fall, and Essos would follow. Vlad let his words settle before continuing. That's all for now, gentlemen. The rest we will plan in the field. We know plans never survive first contact with the enemy. We will not waste effort on strategies too far ahead. One by one, the attendees began to leave. Some in silence, others whispering to each other, but none dared question what they'd heard. Vlad remained by the map, unmoving, eyes fixed on the pieces as if he could still see the war playing out in his mind. Daenerys approached once everyone had gone. She walked without hurry, crossing her arms while watching him with one eyebrow slightly raised. Is something bothering you? Vlad let out a faint sigh, barely audible. He took a moment to respond, and when he did, his voice was lower than usual. I take no pleasure in bloodshed, it's not what I want, nor what should be necessary. But there's no alternative. This goes beyond a throne, Dany. You know that if it were up to me, I'd spend eternity with you in some distant castle. A warm smile lit his face. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she stepped closer and placed a hand over his chest, right above his heart, which no longer beat, just like hers. You're not alone in this anymore, she said simply. We'll do it together, no matter what comes. Vlad looked at her, serious, for a moment more, then his expression softened. He leaned in and kissed her, gently at first, then with more intensity, as if the moment itself gave him breath. Daenerys kissed him back the same way, her hand at the back of his neck, not letting go. No more words were needed. With just a look and a knowing smile, they left the room quickly and disappeared into the tower's corridors. To spend a warm night together. As always, the days passed swiftly. Vlad spent his time planning until the moment came to leave for Braavos on Dracul's back, now the size of a blue whale, large enough to swallow a grown man whole. The flight from Meereen was surprisingly quick, even by Vlad's standards. Dracul flew as if trying to impress him, gliding through the air currents with precision, using every draft to gain speed. Vlad rarely felt stress, but coordinating a war effort was one of those exceptions. Yet up there in the sky, he felt weightless, free. Dracul twisted through the air as if showing off, as if saying, "Look at me, father." His metallic armor clinked with every move, and the leather saddle was the only thing anchoring Vlad to the beast's back. As for the dragons, Vlad knew the ritual had connected them all in a special way. It was a kind of empathic bond. He and Daenerys could feel what the dragons felt, and vice versa. His magic had also made them grow faster, stronger, and smarter than any dragon that had ever existed, even before Valyria. Slowly, they had even begun to speak. Simple, short phrases, but clear. Anyone who heard them would understand what they meant. When Braavos emerged on the horizon, Vlad merely watched it in silence. The city was a gray and damp sprawl, crossed by canals and shrouded in mist. The Titan of Braavos stood in the bay, but it paled before Dracul's shadow looming over the rooftops. The dragon did not go unnoticed. His roar echoed between the towers, unleashing chaos. The Braavosi were brave, but no courage could withstand such a creature. Had it been Daenerys arriving, they would have welcomed her with reverence. All of Essos knew and respected the benevolent mother of dragons. Her husband was another story. As soon as it became clear that the dragon rider was a man, the city fell into panic. Bells rang, sailors rushed to secure their ships, people pointed at the sky, screaming. A stampede of citizens tried to flee as far as they could from the Lord Impaler. Vlad's reputation had already become legend in the free cities, a sort of modern boogeyman. Merely mentioning his name was enough to make men, women, and children shiver. Upon seeing the chaos, Vlad could only smirk. That was precisely his goal, to be the demon under the beds of those who defied order, the only way to prepare the world for the long night. 14 comments 0 vote. Chapter 59, Braavos. The landing was direct, without detours. Vlad guided Dracul to the Sea Lord's palace, a solid, fortified structure with dark roofs and statues that faced the sea. Dracul landed with force, shaking the ground and kicking up a cloud of dust. A few tiles fell, a nearby horse bolted, and the guards didn't know whether to run, scream, or freeze in place. Vlad dismounted from the dragon, letting himself fall from the height slowly and gently, like a leaf carried by the wind. It was a striking contrast to his figure, 6 feet 1 inch of broad shoulders and muscular arms, clad in dark Valyrian scale armor and a cloak red as blood. The scarlet witch sword hung from his waist, as eye-catching as he was. He took a few steps toward the entrance, unhurried, while Dracul settled behind him, lying down like a giant, peaceful hound. Likiri, Dracul, Umbagan Daer, he commanded in High Valyrian, stroking the scaly neck of the beast. The dragon responded with a purring sound, though due to its size, it came out more like a menacing growl. A platoon of soldiers crowded the entrance, trembling swords in hand. Vlad simply stood in front of the dragon, hands clasped behind his back, which only emphasized his commanding presence. He waited patiently for someone to invite him in. After all, he had come to negotiate, and he could be as polite as the situation demanded. Several tense minutes passed before, finally, from behind the soldiers, a man in dark clothing and a short cape emerged. He walked with a hurried, nervous pace, as if carrying a grenade in his hands. He stopped at a cautious distance, swallowing hard before offering a slight bow. "My lord," he began, his voice barely a choked whisper. The Sea Lord wishes to know what you seek in Braavos, Vlad Dracul." The name, spoken aloud, seemed to tense every person present. The surrounding soldiers instinctively flinched, and one even dropped his spear. Vlad looked at him calmly, wearing a neutral and elegant expression. "I seek only an audience," he replied in a deep voice. "A proposal I am sure the Sea Lord will wish to hear." The envoy shuddered at his courteous tone, as if the contrast only made him more terrifying. He nodded immediately, unsure how to proceed. "Why, you may enter, my lord," he stammered, bowing clumsily. "Please, this way." The gates creaked open slowly. Vlad walked without hurry, his cloak billowing behind him, as striking as it was elegant. Dracul did not move from his spot, but his eyes remained fixed on the entrance, watching every tiny soldier left behind to keep an eye on him. As Vlad moved through the palace halls, the soldiers standing along the sides stepped back. Courtiers fled to other rooms, and even the boldest servants found excuses to disappear through side doors. The silence was nearly absolute, only Vlad's footsteps and those of the escort echoed through the palace. Vlad smiled inwardly. This was precisely the reaction he had sought ever since he began impaling people. Not out of vanity, but pragmatism. What soldier would march to war against the dreaded Lord Impaler? At last, the great doors of the Sea Lord's chamber swung open. The interior revealed a long, dark hall lit by candles and adorned with Braavos banners. At the far end, the Sea Lord sat on a throne of black stone, flanked by several high-ranking nobles. At his side stood the first sword of Braavos, a man clad in full armor, bearing the expression of one marching to war, with one hand firmly resting on the hilt of his curved blade. Several guards stood in formation around the chamber, discreetly surrounding Vlad. The atmosphere was heavy, thick with tension. The Sea Lord, an older man with a neatly trimmed gray beard, tried to maintain his dignity, but couldn't help his fingers drumming anxiously on the armrest of the throne. The surrounding nobles avoided meeting Vlad's gaze. Vlad stopped a few paces from the center of the hall and lifted his gaze calmly, taking in every corner, every trembling face. "Greetings, Sea Lord," he said with a slight bow, without losing a shred of his imposing presence. "I am Vlad Dracul. I come to propose an agreement to Braavos." Despite Vlad's respectful and elegant tone, a chill swept over everyone present. As if, despite his words, the deal would cost them the lives of their firstborn. The Sea Lord took a deep breath, trying to control the tremor in his hands before slowly rising to his feet. When he finally spoke, his voice was sharp and tense, everything contrary to the image of courage he wished to project. "Braavos is not a city accustomed to dragons on its rooftops, Lord Dracul," he said, lifting his chin slightly with a forced air of dignity. "The sight of such a creature has caused panic. Some would see this as a threat." His words were followed by a dense silence. One of the nobles swallowed hard. The first sword, however, never took his eyes off Vlad, fully alert for any movement. Vlad maintained his serene posture, hands clasped behind his back, without the slightest sign of hostility. His gaze rested briefly on the Sea Lord, then swept the hall before speaking in a calm voice, modulated like a well-bred noble educating one of his duller servants. "Dragon lords travel with their dragons, Sea Lord," he said gently. "It would have been unthinkable for Aegon the Conqueror to ask for permission before landing in any of the," he paused, as if choosing his words carefully, "noble free cities. It is assumed to be an honor to receive a dragonlord." The comparison sent a shiver through several in the room. The name Aegon still carried weight, and the suggestion that Vlad considered himself his equal did not go unnoticed. However, his tone wasn't arrogant. It was a simple statement, as if explaining why the sun rises in the east. 23 comments 0 vote. Chapter 60. Lord of the Sea. The Sea Lord pressed his lips together, visibly frustrated, but before he could reply, one of the nobles, a middle-aged man in a purple doublet adorned with pearls, stepped forward, raising a hand impatiently. "Lord Dracul, please, I beg you, get to the point," he said with a nervous but clear voice. "Why have you come to our city?" Another noble murmured in agreement, and a third one nodded. No one wished to prolong the presence of the Lord Impaler in the palace longer than necessary. Vlad raised an eyebrow, amused by their reaction. "Very well, let us speak plainly," he said at last, in a tone that was almost theatrical. "I have come to Braavos to negotiate. I wish to hire part of your merchant fleet." His words, though clear, left several of them puzzled. "If Lord Dracul wishes for Braavos to offer its services for transporting something, we shall gladly make the proper arrangements," announced the Sea Lord, visibly more composed. "Not what, but whom," Vlad corrected. "I want to rent part of Braavos's fleet to transport my army to King's Landing, shall we say, 300 ships." Those present paled. Every ruler in Essos knew the size of Vlad's army. More than 100,000 men, all ready to fight and die for the pair known as the Breakers of Chains. "That is inconceivable," protested a noble, clearly alarmed. "Braavos will not take sides in the wars of foreign kings." "I'm not asking you to take sides." Vlad raised a hand calmly. "I have my own war fleet, enough to secure the passage. I only wish to use your merchant ships. I need transport for men, weapons, provisions. Nothing more." The nobles leaned in slightly. Even the Sea Lord stopped drumming his fingers. The agreement Vlad proposed was more than feasible. Besides, there was precedent, obviously not on such a scale, but Braavos had lent its ships to transport troops more than once to those who could pay their price. The real question was whether Vlad would pay that price. 300 ships would paralyze maritime trade, objected the Sea Lord. The city cannot afford such a diversion of resources. Vlad nodded, as if he had expected that. 200 then. For 4 months, no more. There was a moment of low discussion. The Sea Lord whispered with his advisors and consulted documents. At last, he looked up. It might be possible, but every transaction requires payment. What do you offer in return, Lord Dracul? That was the heart of the matter. The Sea Lord feared Vlad would demand their fleet without offering anything of true value. After all, letting them live was a decent argument in a negotiation. In such case, Braavos would accept, but at least the Sea Lord would know that reasoning with Vlad Dracul was not an option. But Vlad was no foolish tyrant seeking enemies for trivial reasons. He usually paid in kind, but he also kept his word. 200,000 gold dragons, paid by my family within no more than a month. And a non-aggression pact with Braavos for 15 years. Neither my armies nor my allies will attack your routes, cities, or interests, whether in Westeros or Essos. The effect was immediate. Even the most skeptical leaned forward. The gold was welcome, but the true treasure was the promise of peace. And if Braavos is attacked by others? Asked the Sea Lord in an inquisitive tone. You will receive military support, within reason, Vlad replied with a slight shrug. I don't send dragons for mere raids, but if a nation declares war on you, you may count on my family's aid. Little by little, it seemed the fear Vlad inspired was beginning to be eclipsed by the benefits of allying with him. After all, despite his infamous reputation, there were no tales of him slaughtering innocents without cause. The agreement was sealed swiftly, without any inconvenience. Several nobles present displayed an almost excessive interest in Vlad's war plans, but he remained deliberately vague, refusing to reveal important details. He only mentioned aloud that his objective was to attack King's Landing in 2 months. That, unfortunate, slip of information was, of course, a deception. Vlad knew that the Lannisters, Littlefinger, and the Spider had spies everywhere, and with Braavos being such an important port, it was obvious that news of his military preparations would spread quickly. He was counting on it. And in truth, it served his plans. He doubted Tywin Lannister would fall for such an obvious stratagem, but it was often easier to deceive an intelligent man than a complete fool, so it remained to be seen. As for the situation in King's Landing, truthfully, he cared little about the changes to the history he knew. At this point, he had most of the bases covered for when the long night finally began. However, Joffrey's death was still something he needed to ensure. He wasn't entirely convinced that, given the current situation, Olenna Tyrell would go ahead with her plan to poison the bastard, but it didn't matter. He intended to be present at that feast, and if the little plague didn't die, he would handle it himself. Some might wonder why not simply kill him directly, with brutality and without pretense. Vlad, of course, had considered the idea. But the fact was he didn't plan to rule the entirety of Westeros by himself. He would need loyal and trustworthy lords, not ones controlled by magic, but by oaths. And, unfortunately, the Lannister bastards, Tommen and Myrcella, though illegitimate, were still Baratheons on paper. With Renly dead and Stannis as prone to surrender as Ned Stark, he would need Storm's End to be occupied by a more docile Baratheon. Tommen was the best candidate. As for Castle Rock, Vlad could name Tyrion or Jaime as heir, if they survived, or even have them legally adopt Myrcella, evidently after the tragic death of his mother, making her the de facto heir. It didn't truly matter which option he chose, but it would be foolish not to take advantage of such convenient levers of control, especially if they prevented unnecessary deaths. And he doubted the 2 children, easily influenced and still innocent, would ever ally with someone who, hypothetically, had brutally murdered their brother. No matter how much of a psychopath he had been. 10 comments 0 vote. Chapter 61, Practice. After the meeting with the Sea Lord, Vlad did not depart from Braavos immediately, much to the dismay of the nobles. Instead, he made his way calmly to the Iron Bank. It was a good time to check in on his own offspring within the institution, and ensure that his takeover was sailing smoothly. Belcaro received him without fanfare, following the usual protocol of the Iron Bank. The institution was not prone to pampering the egos of nobles. Why should they? They were, practically, the most powerful entity in Braavos. But Vlad couldn't have cared less. Protocol was something one learned to despise over time, and he much preferred being spoken to like a tavern boy rather than a king. Belcaro was adapting to immortality surprisingly well. He had served Vlad for years and had risen quickly through the bank's ranks. He was only a couple of years away from becoming one of its directors. And when that happened, Vlad would control half the money flowing across both continents. One detail he particularly appreciated was that Belcaro had finally secured a real dragon egg, after years of searching. Why had it taken so long? Well, truthfully, authentic dragon eggs were extremely rare. Most of those circulating on the market came from the time of the Dance of the Dragons, relics lost amid conflicts, plunder, or tragedy. He was sure Daenerys would appreciate a younger, small and scaly child. After the meeting, Vlad had left Braavos on Dracul's back, but had actually sent him flying alone to search for his mother's ship, as he could feel where it was. He, on the other hand, slipped back into Braavos under cover of night, moving easily through the city's long alleys, searching for the address Belcaro had provided. Vlad had requested a safe house with a basement. He wanted to test his method of long-distance travel using fire as a medium. It was experimental magic, not particularly dangerous, but certainly eye-catching, so he preferred privacy. When he found the house, he entered quickly and alerted his offspring gathered in King's Landing to find a discreet spot and light a fire, then pour their own blood into it, acting as a beacon. Vlad didn't need long incantations or prayers to any god. He simply focused on the power of pyromancy flowing through his body and visualized the effect he wished to achieve. His body ignited in flames, as if his very flesh fused with them, his eyes blazed as if he were a demon, his hair merged with the fire, waving like a wildfire, and just as the flames threatened to consume the basement completely, he vanished. Northern coast of Lee. The Red Lady sailed peacefully along the northern coast of Lee. The enormous merchant ship, practically brand new, had clean, polished wood with smooth finishes. It was one of Vlad's most recent vessels, and although it appeared to be transporting fabrics and spices, its true cargo could not have been more precious to him. Daenerys was in one of the cabins, wearing an elegant Dornish silk dress that clung softly to her figure. The most curious thing was her posture. She was sitting cross-legged in a meditative position, one hand extended forward. Her brow was furrowed, her jaw slightly clenched, as if solving an especially complex math problem. In the center of her palm floated a small sphere of fire, no larger than a marble. It danced with a timid orange light, flickering weakly as Daenerys tried to keep it stable. Sometimes it spun slowly, other times it trembled and extinguished completely. She sighed each time that happened, but didn't give up. Since Vlad had turned her, her affinity with magic had intensified. She was more sensitive to power, felt it running over her skin like a warm whisper. And yet, she couldn't quite master it. "It's better than yesterday," Missandei commented with a kind smile, not looking up from the thick book in her hands. It was the same volume Vlad had given her before setting sail, a compendium on the principles of pyromancy, filled with personal notes in the margins. Some passages were poetic, others completely cryptic. Some even seemed written in another language. Missandei had decided to read it with her, helping interpret the more abstract parts. "Better isn't good enough," Daenerys murmured, closing her fingers to extinguish the sphere with a soft hiss. "If I'm going to face enemies who master magic, I need more than a playful spark in my palm." Missandei closed the book carefully, looking at her calmly. "Taming a dragon isn't as easy as casting a spell. Vlad told you this would take time. And time is the one thing I don't have," she replied, though her voice sounded somewhat bitter. The journey had been long, more than a week sailing along the coasts of the narrow sea instead of flying over them. But there was a reason for it. The meeting with Prince Doran had been arranged in secret, so she couldn't appear riding Balerion over the skies of Sunspear. If she did, the news would reach King's Landing before the day was over. Too much spectacle ruined diplomacy. That's why the Black Dragon had flown alone to a deserted island in the Stepstones. He would wait there until she finished her meeting with the Lord of Sunspear. After that, the return would be swift, a flight of a few hours to Meereen, where the war preparations were nearly complete. Daenerys rose gracefully, stretching her legs and walking to the cabin's window. The sea was calm. Voyages from Essos to Sunspear were usually smooth, very scenic. "When I arrive, we'll see if the Myrtels still consider me family," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Though I doubt it. Doran is intelligent, and he won't trust easily." Missandei stepped forward, gently placing a cloak over her shoulders. "And the princess? Arianne, she's the heir, isn't she? Wouldn't it be easier to win her over?" The queen rolled her eyes with a slight huff. "If it were Vlad, maybe. Reports say she's impatient, impulsive, and quite lustful. I think that's why Doran still hasn't announced whether she'll inherit or not when he dies." Daenerys kept her gaze on the horizon for a few more seconds. The sea was calm, too calm for her liking. She had spent much of the trip without any trouble, which once would have been a relief. But now, it only gave her more time to think. "I hope my stay in Sunspear isn't too problematic," she said casually, turning to Missandei. "It'd be nice if, just this once, everything went according to plan." Missandei gave her a small smile, saying nothing. Both of them knew that almost never happened. She passed her hand over the table and reopened the book, carefully flipping through it until reaching a section she had marked earlier. "Let's try again," she said finally, extending her hand forward once more. "This time I want to hold it for more than a minute." Missandei sat beside her again, ready to correct, read, or simply observe in silence. The fire sphere reappeared in Daenerys' palm, lively and stubborn like its owner. "Try not to burn anything," Missandei said playfully. Again. Daenerys let out a small laugh, not taking her eyes off the sphere. "Relax, it only happened a couple of times." And with that, the cabin filled with the soft orange glow of the flame, while the Red Lady continued its course toward the distant south. 14 comments 0 vote. Chapter 62, Playing with Fire. Meanwhile, in Sunspear, Doran Martell sat in his study, once again contemplating the letter that had been delivered to him several weeks earlier. The letter bore a red ink seal, written on high-quality parchment, with clear letters traced in beautiful, elegant handwriting, direct in tone, yet courteous. What disturbed Doran the most was not the content of the letter, but the manner in which it had appeared. No guard had seen the messenger. No servant had brought it. And he himself had found it on his desk at dawn, among reports and paperwork, as if it had always been there. That silent presence said more about the author than the written words themselves. Doran took a deep breath and placed the parchment on the table, next to an untouched glass of sand wine, just as Arianne entered, wrapped in silk, with that same blend of grace and pride that reminded him of her sister Elia. "Father," she greeted, approaching with light steps. "You were looking for me." "Yes. Sit down," he said with a glance. "I want you to be prepared. In a few days, we'll be receiving an important visitor." "Who?" she asked, taking a seat across from him. "Daenerys Targaryen, or rather, Daenerys Dracul Targaryen. The exiled princess is coming to Dorne?" Arianne asked, frowning, as if the announcement made no sense at all. "Why?" Doran closed his eyes for a moment, suppressing the sigh building in his chest. Of all his daughter's flaws, impulsive, impatient, stubborn like her mother, her lack of a clear understanding of the political game worried him the most. "Because she is not just an exiled princess," he said, slowly opening his eyes to look directly at her. "She is the de facto queen of Meereen, the recognized ruler in Qarth, the wife of the conqueror of Yunkai and Astapor, of Vlad Dracul. Together they control cities, trade routes, armies, and dragons." "Dragons?" Arianne repeated with a half-smile, tilting her head. Come now, father. Those are just old wives' tales. 100 such tales, Doran replied calmly, yet firmly, become a fact. Our spies have seen them in Meereen. A week ago, in Braavos. Unless you know something that my vast web of informants doesn't, we must act as though the dragons are real. Arianne didn't answer immediately. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her robe while her gaze wandered out the window. The name that truly lingered in her mind wasn't Daenerys, but Vlad. The shadowed figure behind Meereen's throne, the man surrounded by stories that brushed the edge of the impossible. I've heard more about him than about her, she admitted, without looking at her father. They say Vlad Dracul has no shadow. That he can walk through fire without burning. That he impales his enemies for fun. Are those things true? Doran didn't respond with scorn or irony. He simply rested both hands on the arms of his chair and met his daughter's gaze with seriousness. It was clear he did not appreciate jokes. What is true, he said, is that he appeared out of nowhere. That he commands the Dothraki, the deadliest cavalry in the known world. That he has raised an army without a family name, without a banner, without royal favor. He is intelligent, focused, and dangerous. Underestimating him would be a mistake Dorne cannot afford. Is he after the throne? Arianne asked. I don't know. But you think he is, she pressed. She knew her father well. I don't know, Doran repeated honestly. But what I do know is that his wife is coming to Dorne. Why she comes remains to be seen. But I hope that when she arrives, you'll behave as the heir to this house should. Arianne smiled softly, the smile of an obedient daughter. Of course, father, I will welcome her as she deserves. Doran didn't respond immediately. He watched her for several seconds before sighing, but said nothing more. Arianne thought herself clever, but the sad truth was that she had begun playing the game without fully knowing the rules. Her intentions were so obvious to Doran that he almost pitied her. When she left him, Arianne walked through the halls of Sunspear without haste, letting the warmth of the marble beneath her feet relax her. Her mind, however, moved swiftly. The arrival of the exiled princess might be a complication, but she would not let that stop her. She didn't need dragons or armies. Her play had already begun. While her father wove alliances and crawled before lions and the throne, she was preparing her own crown. Soon, Myrcella would be queen. She had practically trained the girl for that purpose, and with her by her side, the Dornish would cry out her name. And with her on the throne, the lion would finally pay his blood debt. The sun burned high over the sandy-colored walls of Sunspear when the palace gates opened with ceremony. Daenerys had arrived without incident and had left the port without fanfare, accompanied only by a handful of men, her face hidden beneath a silk hood and veil. The escort that accompanied her stopped at the foot of the stairway, a few elite soldiers, Vlad's 5 blood riders, Missandei, and a small entourage of servants and porters. They were not many, but more than enough to ensure her comfort and safety. Although, in truth, she no longer needed protection. Daenerys walked at the front, flanked by the blood riders, her steps soft and measured. Everything about her radiated beauty and elegance. There was something about her walk that felt hypnotic, as if she didn't walk at all, but floated above the marble tiles. The white linen robe she wore seemed to move with a life of its own, and her nearly silver hair flowed like a cascade over her shoulders, barely hidden by the veil and hood. From the cool shadows of the entrance hall, Arianne saw her arrive alongside her father, and for a moment, just one, she felt small. Arianne was beautiful, and she knew it. In fact, she wielded it as a weapon. She knew what she stirred in both men and women: desire, respect, envy. How to make men kneel and women whisper with admiration. But that woman crossing the hall outshone her. Outshone everyone. Arianne looked at her, and she knew, even with her face covered, that she was in the presence of the most beautiful woman she had ever seen. And what she felt wasn't admiration, but envy. Rage. Desire. Everything she herself was used to provoking, and that infuriated her. Doran, ever the diplomat, inclined his head from his wheeled chair. It was all the courtesy he could offer. 22 comments 0 vote. Chapter 63, veiled threats. Missandei, walking behind her queen, stepped forward to announce her. Before you stands Daenerys Dracul Targaryen, first of her name, rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms, the Stormborn, Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea, the Unburnt, mother of dragons, breaker of chains, wife to the great conqueror of the East and queen of Meereen. Daenerys stopped at the foot of the low throne just as Doran raised a hand in welcome. Sunspear opens its gates to you, your grace, he said with a firm, serene voice. And House Martell offers you its hospitality. I accept it with gratitude, Prince Doran, she replied softly. A voice so perfect that Arianne felt a chill. Your name is honored beyond the narrow sea. The courtiers murmured respectfully. Doran nodded, then looked to his daughter. My daughter, Princess Arianne Martell. Arianne stepped forward with a slight bow and a warm smile. She wore a tight-fitting orange silk gown that accentuated her curves and contrasted beautifully with her sun-kissed skin. Her dark, wavy hair cascaded freely down her back. She was the living embodiment of Dornish beauty, and, until 30 minutes ago, the most beautiful woman in the realm. Welcome to Dorne, your grace, she said with poise. I've heard so much about you, I feel as though I already know you. Daenerys observed her for a moment, then gave a slight smile that never reached her eyes. Dorne is known for raising strong and intelligent women. I'm pleased to see the rumors are true. There was a pause, courteous, yet tense. Doran, in his infinite wisdom, remained silent, a spectator to that metaphorical duel of queens. It was Arianne who broke the silence with a soft, beautiful laugh. We were eagerly awaiting your arrival, though I confess, I half expected you to arrive riding a dragon. They say you have 4. Her tone was light, almost playful, but like all things in Dorne, it carried poison. Daenerys remained unbothered. She didn't even blink. We considered that option, she replied with serene calm and a dazzling smile. But it might have been perceived as a threat. Oh, it's impossible for you to threaten Dorne, Arianne replied, as if they were old friends. Is it, Princess? Daenerys asked, amused, as if it were obvious. Arianne frowned, confused. Is what? Daenerys's smile could have melted stone. Impossible. Her tone remained kind, but it was unmistakably a threat. Arianne parted her lips in surprise, but ended up smiling with practiced grace. Doran narrowed his eyes, though he said nothing. And your husband? Arianne asked, as though making polite conversation. The infamous Lord Impaler. Many hope to meet the man who makes warriors tremble from Braavos to Et. Sadly, he had a wedding to attend, Daenerys answered with mock regret. Doran raised a hand, cutting the tension with diplomacy. Your presence in Sunspear is an honor. We have much to discuss. If it pleases you, let us retire to the gardens, where the wine is chilled and the heat less oppressive. Daenerys nodded politely. Both royals gave her passage, though Arianne lingered behind, watching the queen walk away. Inside her, a storm brewed, a mix of jealousy, envy, and a creeping certainty. Daenerys was a threat to her plans. The hanging gardens of Sunspear offered a gentle respite beneath Dorne's burning skies. Flowers and fountains adorned the space, filling the air with a soft, pleasant scent, turning it into a haven of calm and beauty. It was tradition for palace lovers to walk there, enjoying the shade and serenity. Prince Doran moved forward in his chair, Arianne pushing him gently while they spoke casually with Daenerys. Missandei and the guards kept a respectful distance. Dorne has a relentless climate, Daenerys said with a light smile, glancing up at the flowering branches. But this place is as cool and beautiful as an oasis. That was the wish of its designer, Doran replied. A Targaryen princess, generations ago. Her name was also Daenerys. Then I thank my ancestors for their exquisite taste. Arianne laughed softly. And for beauty, of course. It seems, your grace, you inherited both. Some would sail across the sea to Meereen just to see your face. Please, Arianne, you'll make me blush, Daenerys said politely, not taking the bait, but not rejecting it either. They sat beneath a pergola covered in violet blossoms. The stone bench was cool in the shade, and a pitcher of wine with cups awaited on a nearby table. I was told your health keeps you confined to Sunspear, Daenerys commented, courteously. Gout is a cruel companion, Doran replied, shrugging with quiet grace. But I've learned to live with it. Daenerys carefully took out a small dark glass vial, sealed with red wax, and placed it on the table near the prince. This might help. It's a potion I was given in Essos. It has no side effects, but I was told it might cure your affliction. Doran observed it silently. He did not ask what it contained, though his gaze lingered on the red seal. He took it slowly and stored it away without comment. His expression remained calm, though his eyes had sharpened. It was her blood, just a few drops, mixed with wine and sealed with heat. Vlad had said a few drops could heal wounds and illnesses. The only caution was ensuring the drinker didn't die immediately, or they'd become his offspring. But Daenerys wasn't concerned. Doran was safe in Sunspear. I thank you, the prince said at last, in a measured tone. It's the least I owe you, for your hospitality and for the history your house shares with mine, Daenerys replied. Doran nodded. Silence lingered for a few moments as they drank a cup of wine, until Arianne broke it with a question. It's touching that you care so much for our family, your grace. Especially, considering you didn't grow up among us, Arianne said with false kindness. Daenerys did not lose her composure. 9 comments 0 vote. Chapter 64. Doran Martell. I didn't grow up in Westeros, but it wasn't by choice, she replied softly. My family was hunted, killed, and scattered. If I wasn't born here, it's because the men who usurped my father's throne made sure I couldn't be. Arianne raised an eyebrow but didn't respond immediately. And yet, she said after a brief pause, her lips curling ever so slightly, you seem to have done quite well for yourself. Doran, who until then had kept his eyes fixed on his goblet, spoke up before the tension could rise. Indeed, despite everything, the princess has flourished. Breaker of chains, Khaleesi, mother of dragons, you bear nearly as many titles as your husband. And yet, he remains a mystery, few in Westeros know anything about him. He paused, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest of his chair. Imagine my surprise, he added, with a touch of irony and reproach, when I find a letter on my desk signed by none other than the Lord Impaler himself, and no one in the fortress knows how it got there. Daenerys let out a soft, genuine laugh, the first that didn't seem measured or diplomatic. For a moment, her smile lit up her face with a warmth that even disarmed Arianne, who stared at her, unsure whether to smile or frown. Doran, too, was briefly taken aback, as though he had seen a flower bloom under the desert sun. My husband, Daenerys said, eyes gleaming with something almost conspiratorial, has a weakness for the dramatic. Arianne tilted her head slightly, her eyes glinting with a playful and provocative spark. I must admit, your husband intrigues me, she said, letting her words linger like the scent of wine. What kind of man inspires so many stories? Is he truly as formidable as they say, or do the bards exaggerate? Daenerys took a small sip of wine, calmly. The bards usually fall short, she replied lightly, though without a smile. Arianne tilted her mouth into a sly grin. Her fingers played with the stem of her goblet as she let out a low chuckle. Perhaps you might introduce us someday. I'm sure he would appreciate Dornish hospitality, she ended with a sigh that was almost sensual. Her comment was met with silence. Daenerys set her cup down slowly and deliberately. Her eyes, once warm, turned cold. When she spoke, her voice was no longer cordial, but sharp and cutting. Unfortunately, she said, her voice now sharp as a dagger, my husband has little patience for social gatherings. He only tends to entertain one person. Her lips tightened into something that could never be called a smile. It's a pity that there are men and women who will never inspire that kind of devotion. So deep, so exclusive, so permanent. Arianne held her smile, though her fingers tightened slightly around her goblet. Doran swallowed slowly, his face still calm. Both of them sensed, though they couldn't explain why, that for a moment, they were standing before a predator. Doran cleared his throat, breaking the sudden tension. Perhaps it is time to set aside these trivialities, he said firmly, though not harshly. Tell us, Your Grace, what does your family seek in Dorne? Daenerys turned her gaze toward him. Her eyes softened again, though her bearing had lost the lightness from before. Now, she was a queen, not a guest. She set her goblet on the table, adjusted a strand of hair with a brief gesture, and straightened up, locking eyes with the man before her. I've come to see if the Myrtels are still loyal to my family, she answered seriously. And which family would that be? Targaryen. Dracul. Doran replied with an inquisitive tone. Does it matter? My family is the only one with a legitimate claim to the throne. That is enough, she answered, somewhat defensively. My husband was very understanding regarding the name. He allowed me to keep mine, he even took it alongside his, out of respect. But our children will be Dracul. Would you allow House Targaryen to disappear? Doran asked, incredulous. Not necessarily, Daenerys replied calmly. My relatives will carry on my family's legacy. But make no mistake, the Dracul will be the new Dragonlords. I owe Vlad more than I can say. It's the least I could do for him. Arianne then spoke with a mocking tone. Such heartfelt love, princess. Like something out of a tale. Daenerys didn't let the comment affect her. She simply turned back to Doran. Which relatives? The prince asked, a strange light in his eyes. Viserys. Gods. No, Daenerys seemed amused. My brother was executed a few years ago. He was completely mad, so I imprisoned him. Then he tried to rape a kitchen girl who brought him food. Vlad executed him. And you allowed that? Doran appeared stunned. For years, his plan had been to wed Viserys to Arianne. But now, that plan lay in ruins. Of course, Daenerys replied as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He didn't just threaten my life, he was a disgrace, and a threat to my children. Then, picking up her goblet again, she continued in a tone of subtle self-satisfaction. If you're worried about your arrangement with Sir William, I'm sure we can reach a new understanding. For the first time, Doran showed genuine surprise. He hadn't expected Daenerys to know the details of one of his most secret, and dangerous, arrangements. What arrangement? Asked Arianne, frowning. But her father signaled with a glance that they would speak later. If Viserys is dead, Doran continued, deliberately ignoring the previous subject, what relatives are you referring to, then? He didn't trust Dorne enough to reveal that information. All those of Targaryen blood were hunted down and eliminated, either by the usurper or other forces, he said without a hint of tact. I assure you, princess, that you can trust my family, Arianne commented defensively, sounding even offended. After all, we have a history together. I barely trust myself, princess, Daenerys said playfully. And that's a sensible attitude, Doran remarked, glancing at his daughter, urging her to ease her tone. Arianne frowned, her voice laced with irony and disdain. If your family wants something from Dorne, perhaps you should start by offering a little more trust. Daenerys held her gaze without blinking, her smile failing to soften the chill in her words. My family doesn't need Dorne. 19 comments 0 vote.